I never expected my morning routine to turn into the most complicated part of my day, but here we are. 6:15 a.m. Every single morning, I step out onto my front porch with my yoga mat, ready to do my stretches before work. And 6:16 a.m., like clockwork, my neighbor's sprinkler system kicks on and absolutely drenches me. The first time it happened, I thought it was an accident. A malfunction, maybe. I was mid-downward dog when suddenly ice-cold water hit me square in the back. I yelped, lost my balance, and ended up in a heap on my porch, soaked through my favorite gray t-shirt. I looked over at the neighboring yard, and there he was, standing in his kitchen window with a coffee mug halfway to his lips, staring at me with this expression of absolute horror. He mouthed something that looked like, "I'm so sorry," and disappeared from view. I figured that would be the end of it. He'd adjust his sprinkler timer, and we'd both move on with our lives. But the next morning, 6:16 a.m., it happened again. And the morning after that, and the morning after that. By the fourth day, I started to suspect this wasn't an accident anymore, because each time, without fail, I'd catch a glimpse of him in that kitchen window. Sometimes he was holding his coffee. Sometimes he was pretending to look at his phone. But he was always there, watching. And the sprinkler always hit me at the exact same moment in my routine. I'm Caleb, by 28, and I've lived in this little bungalow in Northeast Portland for about 2 years now. It's a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people wave from their porches, and everyone knows the mail carrier's name. I'd moved here after a pretty brutal breakup, looking for a fresh start, a place where I could just exist without drama. I work as a graphic designer from home most days, which is why my morning stretches are so important to me. Sitting at a desk for 8 hours does terrible things to your back, and I'd rather spend 15 minutes on my porch breathing in the morning air than deal with chronic pain. My neighbor, the sprinkler saboteur, moved in about 6 months ago. I'd seen the moving truck, watched from my window as he and a couple friends hauled furniture inside. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark curly hair that looked perpetually messy in that effortlessly attractive way some guys can pull off. I'd noticed the rainbow flag sticker on his laptop when one of his friends set it down on the porch railing. I'd noticed the way his t-shirt rode up when he lifted boxes, revealing a strip of tanned skin. I'd noticed a lot of things, actually, and then I'd firmly told myself to stop noticing, because the last thing I needed was to develop a crush on my neighbor. His name was Thaddeus. I'd learned from the mail that occasionally got delivered to my box by mistake, Thaddeus Chen. It was a name that seemed both old-fashioned and intriguing, and I may have spent more time than necessary thinking about what kind of person goes by Thaddeus instead of Thad or something shorter. After 2 weeks of the sprinkler incidents, I decided I needed to say something. I couldn't just keep getting soaked every morning and pretending it wasn't happening. So one Saturday afternoon, I walked over to his place, rehearsing what I'd say in my head. Something casual and friendly, not accusatory. Just a simple, "Hey, your sprinklers have been catching me in the morning" conversation. I rang his doorbell, and my heart was pounding way harder than it should have been for such a simple interaction. When he opened the door, I was struck all over again by how attractive he was up close. He had these warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners and a small scar above his left eyebrow that I wanted to ask about. "Hi," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "I'm Caleb, from next door." "I know," he said immediately, then looked mortified. "I mean, I know you're from next door, obviously, because you just said that, and I've seen you around in the neighborhood." He was nervous, I realized. This tall, gorgeous man was nervous talking to me. "So, about your sprinkler system," I started, and I watched his face cycle through about 5 different emotions in rapid succession. "God, I'm so sorry," he blurted out. "I keep meaning to fix the timer, but then I forget, or I get busy, or I..." He ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up even more. "I'm really sorry. I'll fix it today. Right now, actually." There was something about the way he said it that didn't quite ring true, like he was reading from a script he'd prepared, but I nodded and smiled and said, "Thanks, I'd appreciate that." The next morning, 6:15 a.m., I stepped onto my porch with my yoga mat. 6:16 a.m., the sprinkler turned on, and there he was in his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching me get drenched. This time, I didn't pretend not to notice. I stood up from my lunge, dripping wet, and looked directly at him. He froze, For a long moment, we just stared at each other across our adjacent yards. Then I raised one hand and waved, a slow, deliberate wave that said, "I see you." He set down his coffee mug and disappeared from the window. I should have been annoyed. I should have been planning to file a complaint or leave a strongly worded note. Instead, I found myself laughing, because the whole situation was so absurd, so unnecessarily complicated, and there was something almost endearing about his terrible poker face. The sprinkler incidents continued, but something shifted between us. Now, when it happened, we'd make eye contact. Sometimes he'd give me this apologetic shrug. Sometimes I'd shake my head in mock exasperation. It became this weird, unspoken thing between us. Our thing. I started timing my routine so I'd be in the perfect position when the water hit. If I was going to get soaked anyway, I might as well make it entertaining. I'd strike dramatic poses, do exaggerated stretches, sometimes even bow like I was finishing a performance, and I could see him trying not to laugh in his window. 3 weeks into this bizarre ritual, I stepped out for my morning stretches to find Thaddeus sitting on his front porch steps. It was earlier than usual, barely 6 a.m., and he looked like he hadn't slept. He was wearing flannel pajama pants and a faded college sweatshirt, and he was holding what appeared to be his 3rd or 4th cup of coffee. "Couldn't sleep," he said when he saw me looking. "Figured I'd wait out here." "Want some company?" I heard myself ask. He nodded, and I walked over, leaving my yoga mat on my own porch. I sat down next to him on the steps, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. The morning was cool, and I could smell his coffee, something dark and rich. "I need to tell you something," he said, staring straight ahead at the quiet street. "The sprinkler thing. It's not an accident." "I know," I said softly. He turned to look at me then, surprise written all over his face. "You know? Thaddeus, it's been over a month. I figured it out." He winced. "God, I'm such an idiot. He paused, seeming to gather courage. "That first morning, when it happened by accident, you were doing this stretch where you had your arms over your head and the sun was coming up behind you, and you looked so..." He stopped, shook his head. "I sound like a creep." "You sound like someone who could have just asked me to coffee," I said. "I tried," he admitted. "I must have walked to your door a dozen times. I'd stand there with my hand raised to knock, and then I'd panic and go home. I'm not good at this stuff. I never have been. In college, I once had a crush on a guy in my chemistry lab for an entire semester and never spoke to him beyond asking to borrow a pencil." I felt something warm bloom in my chest. "So, instead of asking me out, you decided to spray me with your sprinkler every morning?" "When you say it like that, it sounds really weird." "It is really weird, Thaddeus." "I know." He finally looked at me, and there was such genuine vulnerability in his eyes that it made my breath catch. "But it was the only way I got to see you every day. The only way I got to make you notice me, even if you were noticing me for the most annoying reason possible. And then you started doing those poses, and you'd wave at me, and I thought maybe you didn't completely hate me. Maybe you thought it was kind of funny. Maybe you were playing along." "I was playing along," I confirmed, "because I've been trying to figure out how to talk to you since the day you moved in." His eyes widened. "Really?" "Really. I saw you carrying boxes, and I told myself not to get interested because you were my neighbor, and that could get complicated. But then you kept showing up in your window every morning, and you had this look on your face like you were doing something terribly forbidden, and it was kind of adorable." "Adorable," he repeated, like he was testing the word. "I've been losing sleep over this for weeks, and you thought it was adorable." "Well, it was also incredibly inconvenient. Do you know how many t-shirts I've had to change out of?" He laughed, and it was a good sound, warm and genuine. "I'll pay for your dry cleaning." "Or," I said, "you could buy me dinner instead." The smile that spread across his face was worth every single cold morning shower I'd endured. "Yeah? Yeah, but you have to promise to turn off that sprinkler." "Deal," he said immediately. Then, after a pause, "Although I'm going to miss our morning routine." "We can establish a new routine," I suggested. "One that doesn't involve me getting hypothermia." That was 4 months ago. Now our morning routine looks completely different. Thaddeus comes over at 6 a.m., and we have coffee together on my porch. Sometimes I still do my stretches while he watches, but now he's sitting right there next to my yoga mat, telling me about his work as a software engineer or asking my opinion on some design problem he's facing. Sometimes he joins me, attempting yoga poses with the grace of a newborn giraffe, making me laugh so hard I lose my own balance. We had our first official date at a Thai restaurant downtown, where he admitted he'd rehearsed conversation topics in his car for 20 minutes before coming to pick me up. I told him about my ex, about how I'd moved here to start over, about how I'd been so focused on not getting hurt again that I'd almost missed something wonderful happening right next door. He told me about growing up in Seattle, about coming out to his traditional Chinese parents in college, about the anxiety that makes simple things like introducing himself to attractive neighbors feel insurmountable. He told me about the day he saw me through his kitchen window and thought I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, and how he'd immediately spilled coffee all over himself. That's why I disappeared so fast that first morning, he explained. I wasn't just mortified about the sprinkler, I was also covered in coffee. Our second date was a disaster movie marathon at his place, where I learned he provides running commentary on every film and has strong opinions about special effects. Our third date was a farmer's market on a Sunday morning, where we bought fresh flowers and too much artisan bread and held hands while walking between stalls. Somewhere around the fifth date, I stopped counting. It just became us, together, figuring things out. He still gets anxious sometimes, still overthinks simple interactions, still occasionally forgets how to form complete sentences when I catch him off guard. But now, when that happens, I can kiss his cheek and watch him relax, or take his hand and feel him squeeze back. I learned that he stress bakes at 2 a.m., which is why his kitchen always smells like cookies or banana bread. I learned that he's terrified of spiders but won't kill them, so he catches them in cups and makes me release them outside. I learned that he falls asleep during movies, but always denies it, even when I have video evidence of him snoring. He learned that I'm impossibly grumpy before my first cup of coffee and should not be spoken to until I've had at least 3 sips. He learned that I reorganize my workspace when I'm stressed and that the best way to help is just to sit nearby and exist. He learned that I have a terrible sense of direction and will get lost in parking garages, grocery stores, and once, memorably, in his own apartment complex. Last week, I woke up at his place after falling asleep on his couch during a documentary about deep-sea creatures. He'd covered me with a blanket and left a glass of water on the coffee table. When I found him, he was in his kitchen making breakfast, humming off-key to some song playing from his phone. "Morning," I said, and he turned around with this smile that still makes my heart do complicated things. "Morning, I made pancakes. Fair warning, they're probably terrible. I forgot to add baking powder until halfway through." "I'm sure they're perfect," I said, wrapping my arms around him from behind. He leaned back into me. "I'm really glad my sprinkler hit you that first morning. I'm really glad you're bad at fixing timers." "I'm actually great at fixing timers," he admitted. "I just didn't want to." I turned him around to face me. "I know. You know, Thaddeus, you're a software engineer. I figured you could handle a sprinkler timer." He looked sheepish. "How long have you known?" "Since about the second week." "And you didn't say anything?" "I was curious to see how long you'd keep it up. Plus it was kind of romantic in a weird, very soggy way." He kissed me then, soft and sweet, tasting like coffee and morning and all the days ahead of us. When we pulled apart, he was smiling. "For the record," he said, "I would have eventually worked up the courage to actually talk to you." "How long would it have taken?" "Only a few more months, maybe a year." I laughed and kissed him again. Outside, the morning sun was rising over our quiet neighborhood, and somewhere nearby, a sprinkler system turned on right on schedule, watering someone else's lawn. But we were here, together, and that was more than enough. Sometimes the best things in life happen because someone's too nervous to just knock on your door. Sometimes they happen because of broken sprinkler timers and early morning stretches and the courage it takes to finally admit what you want. Sometimes they happen right next door, so close you almost miss them, so perfect you can't imagine your life any other way. And sometimes love shows up soaking wet at 6:16 in the morning, and all you can do is laugh and wave and see where the story goes. Total_char_count, 16,847.